We are a peaceful people, struggling we struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces, from foreign places, talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belong to we. Not the one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. This land is our land now, we're gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow, but never break. Our fathers came here, and they lived and died here, and we are moving from here, make no mistake. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belong to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupanuni and the Essequibo, daytime or night. Though we criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we mean to keep it. We have that right. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belong to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass, not one golden apple, not one jamun, not a drop of water from the farmer room, not one sherriga.
Welcome to another edition of Voice of the Diaspora. In studio with me today is a very, very special guest. Retired Rear Admiral and the former Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defence Force. A man of great intelligence, a man of great discipline, a man of great panache, a man of decency and decorum, a professional in his field and otherwise, a distinguished Guyanese. Dr. Gary Best joins me now to talk about the Guyana-Venezuela controversy, the December referendum that Venezuela is having, and what can be done to avert any impending invasion on our country. Dr. Best, welcome to Voice of the Diaspora. I know it's your first time here, and I have quite a lot of young people in the diaspora that follow this program and in Guyana also. And so I would like to begin by asking you to introduce yourself and tell us a little about who is Dr. Gary Best. And then we go straight into the program to talk about the Guyana-Venezuela controversy. Dr. Gary Best, welcome again.
Thank you very much, Norman, and thank you for having me on your program. And good night to all the viewers. I'll keep the introduction very short. I'm Gary Best. I served in the Guyana Defence Force for 34.5 years. It was essentially my first job, my first love. I'm a fierce advocate for national defense, fierce advocate for transparent defense, and a fierce advocate for good governance. I believe that in growing up, I was born in Georgetown, but my father's from Ketley Street. My grandfather's from Alboystown. I have families living in the south of Georgetown, the hardcore PNC base. My mother's from Dihup Mahaika, that's in Indo-Guyanese village, and my grandfather and great-grandfather is from Haidam Mahaika. So you bring the two together, and you have Gary Best growing up in Georgetown. I went to I like to say, the best primary school, that's Campbellville Primary School, and the best secondary school, that's North Georgetown Secondary School. So I like to say I went to the best schools in Guyana. Uh, I've gotten a lot from this country, my country. Many scholarships, many opportunities to study, many things I've been able to do through the hard work of the people of Guyana and via various governments. In my own view, this is my give back to my country now, and I'm very grateful to the country that I was born in, that it gave to me, and I try to give back as much as I can now to my country. So I went into academics while I was in the GDF, and subsequently I studied law, I studied international relations, I studied defense and security. So I've equipped myself in those areas, and I give them back now to the people of Guyana. So that's in essence who Gary Best is, and well, who Dr. Gary Best is now. And I'm happy to be able to be on your program and to share my knowledge with the people of Guyana.
And I want to thank you once again for being here. Of course, we will go straight into the program. As we know, Dr. Bess, the Caribbean region, Guyana, of course, is a part of South America. It's considered a part of the Caribbean, also being a part of CARICOM and so on. Many leaders in CARICOM are calling for peace to remain in the region, and we know that there is a controversy. Venezuela is planning, they are threatening our sovereignty, and there's a referendum on the 3rd of December, and after that, many want to know, many Guyanese would like to know what will happen. Will Guyana be invaded? Will there be a war? What can be done to avert it? But in answering that question, I would like you to give us a backdrop about this controversy in your own view, where it started and where it is today, and what we can do.
All right, it's a complex issue, but we have to make it simple. Let me say that I'd like to start from this point. As I speak, Venezuela is occupying a part of Guyana since 1966. That's the Ankoko Island. The Anko Island sits in the Cuyuni-Wenemu River, and half of that island belongs to Guyana, half belongs to Venezuela. That was awarded to us in the 1899 Arbitral Award. So many Guyanese forget that Venezuela is actually occupying a part of Guyana. It's a small island, but it's part of our sovereignty. And that occupation began in 1966, at the time when we became independent. However, the territory that we have today is the territory that was British Guyana. When we became independent, that territory was given to us. So to speak, I use the word given in uplifted commas, to Guyana. That territory was then put into the Guyana Constitution. So it is described in the Guyana Constitution. From 1964 to 1966 to 1970 to 1980, and the 1980 Constitution as amended. So we have consistently enshrined in our Constitution the territory we received from the British. At no point in time did we in Guyana ever extend our territory to any other part of this hemisphere, much less Venezuela. The other important thing for our viewers to know is that between Venezuela, Guyana, and Brazil, the three countries determined that tri-junction point. There's a tri-junction border where those borders meet, and there's an agreement to that. So in 1899, there was an award by the commissioners over the disputed territory between British Guyana and Venezuela. That is between United Kingdom and Venezuela. It has nothing to do with us. And that 1899 award tribunal determined the borders for Guyana. And it says it's a full, final, and perfect settlement of the border. And Venezuela accepted that decision for 62 years, or close to 63 years. And only in 1966, around 1962 rather, Venezuela decided, on the basis of a posthumous letter written by someone who was part of the process, saying that the process was corrupted. But Venezuela to date has produced no evidence, as far as I'm aware, no evidence whatsoever to show any collusion during that war. So the award was in 1899, and since then, it has remained the same. In addition to that, I should mention that the Venezuelan constitution itself, Article 10 and Article 33, into the Venezuelan constitution, it says that Venezuela has 23 states, and none of the states is equitable. And that's in the Venezuelan constitution. So the evidence is clear and overwhelming that this territory that we have was fairly received and is properly administered by the government of Guyana. So that's a brief backdrop. There might be questions flowing from that. But just to say we have a full and final settlement of this issue. And then, because Venezuela acted up when we were about to become independent, Venezuela was given another opportunity through the Geneva Agreement for us to settle the then controversy amicably. And it had nothing to do, the Geneva Agreement has nothing to do with the boundary. There's no mention of Essequibo in the Geneva Agreement. It's just an agreement for us to arrive at an amicable solution to the controversy. And what is the controversy? The controversy is Venezuela indicating that the arbitral award was not done in a particular manner. That's the controversy. So what is before the ICJ is only one thing before the International Court of Justice right now, and that is the award still valid? So it's the validity of the award that is before the ICJ, not the borders between Guyana and Venezuela, just the validity of the award. That's what they'll be dealing with. So Venezuela speaks as though the entire boundary is before the ICJ. That is not the case. It speaks as though that the matter can be resolved through dialogue and bilaterally. That is not the case. That was just one of the means that can be used. That has been exhausted over the decades. And the Secretary General, under his powers, using his powers within the context of the Geneva Convention, referred the matter to the International Court of Justice. And that's where the matter is at the moment. So that's by way of backdrop. If there are any questions that flow from that, I'll be happy to answer.
No, but we understand that Venezuela intends to ignore any ruling of the ICJ. Sorry, and we understand that they have made that quite clear that they are not going to. Their plan is to have the referendum and to take action. Could you elaborate a bit on if that is accurate, for the sake of the viewers?
But Norman, the posture of Venezuela suggests that. That's their posture. The 5-question referendum is out there. The most important question for us in Guyana is the referendum that Venezuela is holding and asking the Venezuelan people if it should annex Essequibo. That's a clear and present threat to Guyana's sovereignty. That is a clear and present danger to the sovereignty of Guyana. So their posture suggests that they intend to annex Guyana. That's their posture. Whether they do it or not is another matter. And Guyana has since gone to the ICJ asking for provisional measures, asking the ICJ, before it even deals with the previous case before it, asking for the ICJ to issue provisional measures. And one of the provisional measures we're asking for, I'm not quoting what is in there, I'm paraphrasing, is that Venezuela will do nothing in the referendum that threatens Guyana. Now, we cannot say to Venezuela that you cannot hold a referendum, but it cannot hold a referendum in its own country. But what it cannot do is hold a referendum that relates to land in Guyana. That's against international law. So it can hold its own referendum, but it cannot hold a referendum that threatens another nation. Those are repugnant to many articles in the United Nations Convention and many legal arguments and many legal cases on the international law. So I would say the posture of Venezuela is that it intends to annex Guyana. That's its posture right now. And whether it does it or not, we have to wait and see. But it's a dangerous precedent. It creates instability, it creates anxiety in the people of Guyana, and it creates potential instability in this region. So I would say, yes, that posture is very threatening.
Dr. Best, you have been a military officer for decades. You're quite experienced. I know you were quite modest, not elaborating on your But when you look at our capacity to retaliate if there's an invasion, In my estimation, we don't have that capacity to retaliate if there's an invasion. We, I think, would depend on the international community. We depend on America and others to intervene. But clearly, there seems to be a good relationship existent between America and Venezuela. Even Barbados and Venezuela seem to have a good relationship. So there is no certainty, I understand, if there is an invasion, whether the international community would come to our rescue. What are your views about that? What is your view about that? Do you think that we would get that sort of support if Venezuela attacks us, or do you believe, this is the pertinent question, do you believe that the international community, America and others, stand to benefit from such an invasion in terms of oil production and so on? Do you think that they can profit from that?
Well, it's a complex question. It's a deep question. I'll share my views in it.
Yes.
I have no crystal ball in the issue, and that's firstly. Secondly, in international, we have a saying: international diplomacy, there are no permanent friends but permanent interests.
Yes.
So, from my perspective, there are some facts, and one is the OAS has issued a strong statement against Venezuelan action. CARICOM has issued a statement against Venezuelan action. So we have those two agencies, those two organizations close to us that have issued statements, and we shouldn't treat them lightly. And those are important statements. And the Americans, US government, governmental representative, that's the ambassador to the US, also spoke on the issue. So that is some comfort. Going deeper than that, and looking at the Guyana Defence Force, as you mentioned, country, our first line of defense is really defense diplomacy. That is it. We were never designed to, and no government has ever decided that we'll spend taxpayers' dollars to build a force that equals Venezuela. That is going to cost too much, and it's almost impossible to do given the resources we have. So it's a three-stage defense of Guyana. Defense diplomacy, where our foreign minister, our ambassadors will be out in the international community speaking to every possible capital about what is happening in Venezuela. And the sum total of that effort internationally is what kept Venezuela at bay for decades. This is the first time they've gone so far. It means we have to intensify that diplomatic effort internationally, because once you're talking and countries are speaking, both collectively and individually, that could keep Venezuela at bay. So on the one hand, I'm saying we need to intensify that diplomatic effort because that's our main effort. And the Defense Force itself is trained to delay the enemy until such time that help comes in internationally. I believe they're quite capable of delaying the enemy until help comes internationally. If you ask me for a timeline, I cannot give you a timeline. However, normally in these kind of situations, we have a great power and a small power. You want to have a sort of a 72-hour window within which the country backs off, or there's an intervention. Whether troops will come and intervene on Guyana's behalf, it's a question up in the air. Let me mention that the regional security system that Guyana is a part of now, there's a treaty we signed. There's an RSS called the Regional Security System. In that treaty we signed, which is headquartered in Barbados, it says an attack on one is an attack on all. It means the CARICOM states will have a treaty obligation to come to Guyana's defense. A lot is not being said about it because they're very small nations, very, very small forces. But as a collective, CARICOM can seek help as a collective. You can have a greater force, a greater power coming in. The other thing I want to mention, and I mentioned that as in answer to your question, that is some comfort, that is some support we can look for as CARICOM region, because the RSS is a treaty organization among CARICOM states. Not every state, but Guyana is one of those states. We also have the counterweight from Brazil. Brazil is a major player, an important player in this region. Our diplomatic efforts with Brazil is also very important. Brazil could make statements that could serve as a counterweight to Venezuelan aggression. So we have to keep that in mind. We have to keep nurturing that good relations with Brazil. So in the continent, we have Brazil. In the region, we have CARICOM as a group, right? Even though individual statements from nations can help, more powerful statements, but CARICOM as a group, I don't think we should deal with it individually. And extra-regional, we have the great powers, United States, United Kingdom, and Britain. I mentioned interest, and you asked a question, will they come to our aid given their interest? Well, the United States has recently eased sanctions in Venezuela,
Yes.
not reduced, moved it, eased sanctions in Venezuela after the October 17th agreement between the government of Venezuela and its opposition for free and fair elections next year. So it's interesting now to see what will play out because Chevron is the major oil company in Venezuela, and the idea is for Chevron to begin to pump oil. So I think President Maduro is playing a very interesting chess game there, hoping to scare Guyana into bilateral talks, which has failed, and at the same time, hoping to win the next elections by promising free and fair elections. Because if not, then those sanctions will return to Venezuela, and Venezuela continue to have the kind of problems he's having. On the threat to, on the threat of a referendum, we've seen a lot of refugees coming into Guyana.
Yes.
We see that thousands of refugees coming into Guyana. We have no information, significant information from the government on who they are, how many they are, where they are. We know, of course, some of them will have Guyanese lineage. That's a fact.
But does the
But we don't
government
know
have
how.
that information and not releasing it to the opposition and others, or they don't know themselves how many refugees are in Guyana from Venezuela? How many
I do not want to
migrants?
think the government. I do not want to think the government doesn't know. I want to think an effective government, a proper government would know, and perhaps information that being shared with the people of this country, not only the opposition, which have the elected representatives, but the people of this country need to know. Because there are different categories of persons coming from Venezuela. Not every person coming from Venezuela is of Guyanese lineage. There's some who can be simply Venezuelan nationals, and we have to determine if they're refugees or if they're economic migrants that come into the country. So that information is outstanding. We don't know it. There was a recommendation that I wrote a piece before that we should have an amnesty and have the Venezuelan nationals come in and determine finally exactly who's where, what they're doing. But that's something I wrote in a piece. Nothing has happened with that. The government has not acted on it or said anything about it, save and except that they're all Guyanese. That's the impression we get. They're all Guyanese. But if a country is threatening to annex your country, one has to conclude that in those portions that are coming to Guyana would include forward elements of the country. It's almost common sense to think that, not to think that people coming from Venezuela are part of Maduro's forward elements because he wants to annex this country. He's threatening Guyana. So that's another concern there. The other thing I want to mention is that we can have a change of the maritime borders within the region. We can have an axis or a triumvirate of crime between Trinidad, Guyana, and Venezuela. We can have that triumvirate of criminal activity, sophisticated crimes in the region. There's so many threats to the social fabric of the Caribbean. So it's not only Guyana is at risk, it's Guyana and the rest of CARICOM. And closer to Guyana would be Trinidad and Tobago. So there's tremendous risk with this action by Venezuela. It's not a Guyana-Venezuela issue. Really, it's a broader CARICOM issue, and I hope that our CARICOM brothers and sisters can recognize it and see that way and make stronger statements of support for Guyana in this particular crisis at this
Well,
point in time.
well, Trinidad Prime Minister Rowley would have made a statement. I think it was yesterday that they're also in some sort of talks with Venezuela, you know, dealing with trade and so on. And he hopes that peace remains in the region, but none of them are saying, including the Barbados Prime Minister, none of them are saying, they're not saying to Venezuela that, what you are doing is against international law, it is wrong, this matters before the ICJ, this decision has been made such a long time ago that the territory belongs to Guyana. They're not making any conclusive statement to say that Venezuela back off. And that is very frightening because Prime Minister Rauli also did not come out in defense of Guyana. But I want to go back to this point that got to do with the migrants, the Venezuelan migrants. So, Dr. Bess, we saw recently the government reaching out to the opposition and saying that we have to hold one head. We have to put aside our differences. The opposition agreeing that we are going to unite on this Venezuela border controversy, and many laud that. And I believe that is patriotic and that is mature. That's political maturity when you're looking at the sovereignty of the nation. Are you saying to me, when I ask you these questions now, this question, are you saying to me that the government is not giving the opposition any information in terms of how many migrants have arrived in Guyana, whether they are militants in Guyana, whether the amount of migrants there outnumber Guyanese people in the Essequibo and so on? Are you saying that we are at a loss because this government is holding back information from us, that we don't know how many Venezuela migrants are across our country?
Well, we are at a loss, as I said. We don't have this information. I think what has happened is that I think the government has interpreted the unilateral, or let me put it this way, the commitment by the opposition to have unity with the government on the Guyana Venezuela issue only to the statement and the debate in Parliament, but it has to go beyond that. It don't has to go beyond that to the sharing of information in relation to the Venezuelan threat to Guyana on every aspect. I think that is what is happening. I think the government has stopped after Parliament and said, "That's it. We have your support," which of course is patriotic, but the government is not going beyond that. What we expect the government to do, what I expect the government to do, is to ensure that those committees that are meant to function to deal with defense, national defense, and those protocols that are meant to exist to deal with national defense will be activated, and therefore those that deal with migration matters, those committees will become active. But I think the government has gone back to managing the situation by itself and has left out the opposition. So in that sense, I believe the government is not dealing fairly, because that is not what being united on the issue of territorial integrity is all about. You have to go beyond the statements in Parliament and deal with the issue on the ground, which have to do with the state of defense, the state of defense resources, the capabilities of our defense sector, the migrants in the country, where they are, who they are, and whether or not, to what extent they are a threat to national security. That, while I admit that's a government lead, it is not a government exclusivity given the context of what is happening right now.
That is that's great that you mentioned that, but it's sad that we are hearing that information is being withheld from the opposition after there's been this big united front between government and opposition, and I am happy that you have ventilated that here. Uh, when when you look at the situation that is happening, and you look at the leadership, the de facto presidency of Barajagdio in Guyana, because many believe that he is the president, and Irfan installed President Irfan Ali is a puppet. I think people wider afield kind of hold that view also. When you look at what has been happening, the letting in of Venezuelans, we understand that it was a decision by Barajagdio to let them come in because he felt that they could have been regularized quickly and harnessed to vote for the PPP at the next election. So there was some sort of electoral consideration by bringing the Venezuelans in, offering them places to stay and so on, papers to be legal and so on. What is your view and what is the opposition doing about that?
Well, I didn't. Well, Norman, I mentioned the opposition earlier because I'm aware of that commitment to work with the government of Guyana on the issue of border defense. But I don't want to be speaking exclusively for the opposition.
Opposition, yeah.
But on this program, on this particular program, well, what I would say is this: that from my perspective, like I said, even at least the president of Guyana, I know there are different things with de facto president, and he's the commander in chief, and that bears a lot of responsibility on his shoulders to ensure that he leads this nation and keep this nation safe. That's his responsibility, as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't matter to me whether there's a de facto or non-de facto de jure. It is President Ali who is charged and sworn in as president in this country. So I expect that that he would commit the resources for defense. I expect that he would involve the opposition beyond just the talk in parliament on these issues, particularly as you mentioned, these refugees or these Venezuelan nationals in the country, and to give assurances that only those of Guyanese lineage are being treated for national papers. And the best way to make that transparent is to release the information to the opposition. That's the point I'm making. That information is being withheld. So it's not good enough to say, okay, we have 2,000, we process 2,000 persons, but show the evidence that they have Guyanese lineage and they're connected to Guyanese. I think that's what Guyanese want. We have no problem at all if they have Guyanese lineage. And those who do not have Guyanese lineage, it means that they will not be offered any national documents, but they'll be offered an opportunity to work in the country, but no national documents that leads towards them having a right to vote. That is a legitimate fear of Guyanese. That is a legitimate fear of the Guyanese elector, a legitimate fear of the opposition or the political parties that the government could. And the extent to which the government does not release the information, does not make it transparent, is the extent to which people hold and believe that the government is up to something that is not too good or too bright for the country.
The government is up to something that's not too good or too bright for the country. Dr. Gary Best here on Voice of the Diaspora, retired Rear Admiral and the former Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defence Force. Dr. Best, I know that you said the buck stops at President Ali to put things right and to ensure that everything, when you, I mean, we're talking as Guyanese, the opposition is saying this, the government is saying that, other stakeholders are offering opinions. But do you believe, as a professional, that there should be a border task force that includes the government, the opposition, and professionals across Guyana and even in the diaspora to deal with this impending threat? What form you think it should take, and who are some of the people that you think should be on such a border task force for it to be successful or for it to be impactful?
Well, I think we have to manage how wide we go. Look at the resources we have and the systems we have in place. We have the Defense Force. So technically, the Chief of Staff is the military advisor to the Commander-in-Chief, who is the President. We have parliamentary committees that deals with defense. I'm not sure what some people mean by a border task force. But I would say we should have a bipartisan approach to this issue. I would say that there are a number of professionals, retired professionals, military minds that are available, and the government should seek to involve them at the level of thinking, at the level of wargaming, at the level of strategizing. The government should seek to tap into the resources in the country. They are available. So I believe, yes, it should be a broad approach, whether you call it a border task force or not. But there's sufficient persons within the body politic, within Guyana, with lots of information, lots of experience in dealing with this matter. Let me give you a good example. During the 70s and 80s, we were committed, the then government, the PNC government, was committed to a concept of total national defense. In Article 33 of our Constitution, it says it is the duty of every citizen to defend the state. That is the Constitution. And by extension, if every citizen has a duty to defend the state, the question, how do you do that? You know what was sprung from that? The concept that every citizen is a soldier. That was built. And further from that, what was developed was a small and affordable Guyana Defence Force and a large reserve. In every territory, every county rather, it will be a reserve force, and you have a small regular force there. That was the defense mechanism to support defense diplomacy. That fell away. Post 1992, that fell away. That whole system does not exist. So we don't hear about total national defense. So we have sufficient persons within Guyana who can take the government through that process, re-engineer it to suit the current circumstances, so we can have a total national defense plan and a total national defense policy for the country. Whether you want to call that a task, border task force, we can call it what we want to call it. But I think we have sufficient persons in this country who can deal with defense, who can deal with defense matters. We have defense experts, national security experts, who at this time, when we're looking at this situation collectively as a country, then we need all hands on deck. And I'm not seeing that happening. I don't think that is happening. I'm not seeing it happening. I can tell you because I'm not involved at any level in dealing with it as a former chief of staff. I know many others are not involved. So there's a lot out there the government can resources it can call on, human resources it can call on, and that is not happening. And I think that is a fault line on the part of the commanding chief. Because the commanding chief of the country, the president, he's the chairman of defense board. And therefore, I think it's his call to ensure that he uses all the resources in this country to ensure that Guyana is much safer and Guyana remains safe. That's his call. The duty is on him. I also want to mention, it's important, it's the duty of every citizen to defend Guyana. That means the total of all human material resources going towards defense. And we have to understand as a nation, when we say that, we're talking about resources, we talk about both human and material resources. So you have people who come forward to that defense effort. They'll be bringing what? They'll be bringing their trucks, they'll be bringing their food, they'll be bringing their resources. They may not go to the front line. That's what it means. Everyone is involved in this defense effort. And I think it's important for the government to lead and ensure that every Guyanese recognizes that he or she has a role to play in the defense, whether you're corporate, whether you're public, whether you're a farmer, or whether you're a banker, that you have a role to play in the defense of this nation. I'm not getting that from the government. I'm not getting that sense from the government. I'm getting a sense that it's only maybe the defense force that is responsible for this defense. It's every citizen is responsible in the area that he or she is functioning. And that can be converted as a defense asset to support the regular force. I'm not getting that. I don't think Guyanese believe that they have a role to play, but they have a feeling that they look towards the Guyana Defence Force. It cannot be exclusively the Guyana Defence Force only. It is the entire nation that has to come to defense. And that is also in the Constitution on Article 33. So I wanted to bring that also to the attention of our viewers.
Dr. Best here on Voice of the Diaspora. Of course, we have covered much, and I would ask him this final question before we wrap up, and also to give him the opportunity to mention anything else he wants to mention here in conclusion. I am a bit dissatisfied with the government's approach, Dr. Best, and I believe that we are not in good hands. But I further believe that the opposition having a united front with the government is a great thing in theory, but in reality, we're still seeing that the opposition is being slighted by the government. It's just like they bring us out to say, yes, it's unity for the sake of the world seeing that as a PR stunt. But deep within, there's no meat to it. And we have to demand We have to make demands on the opposition to ensure that this change. Dr. Best, it's a month away, I think, this referendum. My final question to you, I think you may have addressed it, but I have to still ask. My final question: uh, if there is anything that you can do to advise the president, to advise the government, to advise everyone involved, if there's anything you can say, what would you say to avert, as a military man, an experienced military man? You've been around for a long time in the echelons of the Guyana Defence Force. Um, what would you say that would help to avert this impending invasion on Guyana by Venezuela?
Well, let me treat it as an actual threat of annexation. Yes, and the word invasion is a very strong word, right? I think it's important for us as a collective, and more importantly, led by the president and commander in chief, to bring a sense of calm and a sense of certainty to the citizens of this country. That is to say, the citizens must feel that whatever the government is doing is sufficient enough. And that's not the general impression that I get. So I think that's a government. But also as part of the work of the opposition. It's also part of the work of civil society. And that's why we're doing this on this program. This will help some people to feel comfortable about what is happening in Guyana. So it cannot only be the government, but the government should be leading in this issue more aggressively. The other thing I want to mention is that Article 2 of our Constitution does not permit any person, no minister, no president, no prime minister, from negotiating any part of Guyana's territory. In order to change the landmass in Guyana, in order to change our boundaries in Guyana, we have to go to a referendum and ask the people to change that. And we all know that is not going to happen because Essequibo is ours. So the framers of the Constitution at the time, way back in 66, coming through to the 1970 Constitution and the 1980 Constitution, put into the Constitution the boundaries, and only a referendum can change that. So even though we hear comments and statements being made about giving Venezuela some portion here and some portion there, that could only be done by way of referendum. So I think that is also important for us to understand that land cannot be given away, or sea space or river can be given away by any government in this country. So that is an assurance I think the Guyanese population should have. The
Well,
third thing I would mention.
before
Go
you
ahead.
go to the third thing, all that third thing, don't forget it. But you say Essequibo belongs to us and no one should. But what do you think of this?
Probably on the maritime area, give Venezuela a channel out to the sea. So you make a slight concession in the maritime area. You could probably, on the maritime area, give Venezuela a channel out to the sea. So you make a slight concession in the maritime area.
Of course, that's the voice of Bar Jagdio there. I'm not sure you could see the image, the video, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me say, I heard it before. I know who it is. It's former President Barrett Jagdeo. I think he was speaking as the opposition leader at the time, if I recall. But again, I'm making my only point to that is that it's not doable. That is a statement that, quite frankly, offends the constitutional Article 2, because that is not what the article is intended to do. So I would think, I don't want to say he was ill-advised. I would probably say that he ill-advised himself, because it is not for him to say that. It cannot happen itself. It would not happen. We can't be claiming Essequibo as ours and at the same time speaking in the possibility of giving away part of Essequibo. So I would say that yes, it is the most unfortunate statement to have been made, and it's not something that can happen. I think the most important thing is, having said that, Can it happen? Will it happen? The only way that can happen is if Guyanese decide collectively that they will go to a referendum and give this space to Venezuela. And I don't think we will do that as Guyanese. Second point I want to make on that is the danger of appeasement. If we begin to appease an aggressor, it never stops. So we should not even consider appeasing any part or giving any part of our territory to Venezuela, because that would be appeasement. And appeasement never stops. So those are my thoughts on that particular issue as you raised it.
Dr. Gary Best here. As I said, we are going to wrap up now. I will allow Dr. Gary Best to give his closing remarks. I'm getting some problems here with my lighting and my stuff. And then we will call it an evening. I just want to say to my viewers that I came down with the flu today, and I'm actually not too well. And so I apologize for, my slot. I did say to Dr. Gary Best that I didn't want to push back the program, but I am really, really under the weather. So if my performance is a bit questionable this evening, it's because I'm really, really suffering. It is the cold season in the UK and so on. But Dr. Gary Best has extrapolated in a fantastic way. And I will give him the opportunity to give his closing remarks here. A few minutes to give his closing remarks, and we will call it an evening. Over to you, Dr. Best.
Thank you, Norman, and to the viewers. Let me first say that I commend you to keeping the program date and time, notwithstanding the fact that you're down with the flu. I can see that. And if you notice, I decided to continue speaking to the audience, even though you had some difficulties, because they're most important right now.
Yes.
So let me commend you for that, and the audience is even listening. I trust that the information that I shared that information is able to enrich a better understanding of what is happening. So first, let me say we have an 1899 arbitral award, which is a full, final, and perfect settlement of the boundary between Guyana and Venezuela. Secondly, that matters before the International Court of Justice in order to determine the validity of the award and not the boundary between Guyana and Venezuela. Thirdly, Guyanese and all persons in the diaspora should feel assured that any change of territory could only occur if Guyanese decide to go to a referendum and change that territory. No government can do that. No government can change it. Fourthly, I believe a regional approach to Guyana's security is important, and regional support for any CARICOM country is what should be happening. So I believe we should have stronger statements coming out of CARICOM, and I believe if we do that, Venezuela is likely to step back a little bit. Fifthly, a more rigorous defense diplomacy from the government. More rigorous. And what do I mean by that? Going into the capitals across the country, across the nation. Let's talk to the Brazilians more. Let's get our ambassador in Brazil. Let's get our ambassador in Venezuela. Let's talk to the Cubans. Let's talk to the African Union. Let's talk to all those international agencies. Let's talk to CELAC. Let's talk to the ACS. There are a number of international bodies that can bring pressure to bear in Venezuela. So we have national, where we bring the opposition in and the defensive experts in the country. We have regional, where CARICOM goes a strong body, 15 votes in the UN, and said, here, the buck stops here. The aggressor is not Guyana. The aggressor is Venezuela. Extra-regional, we have defense diplomacy extending itself into those capitals. So that is my summary, I think, of this issue and what we can do. And like I said, there is a clear threat on Guyana's sovereignty by way of referendum. And there is a likelihood, of course, we can't dismiss it, that we can have some serious border incursions after this referendum. But we have to hold fast that the government led by the president will have sufficient defense diplomacy initiative to keep the Venezuelans at bay, while the defense force delay them for as long as they can. That buck stops with the government. And the part that we play as citizens is that it is our duty to defend the state, and all of us must come to the support of this country. All of us. that's beyond the Guyana Defence Force. And those are my final thoughts. I want to thank the viewers for listening, and I trust that the information I shared is well received and will clear some of the doubts you have. And if you have further doubts, we can always speak about them another time in this program when Norman is even better or better.
Yeah,
but I want to thank you for having me.
But you know, I want to ask you this quickly, and then we go. I'm a bit confused about the size of Guyana. Is it 83 square miles or 83,000 square miles?
Well, the question is, if it's arithmetic, it's 83,000 square miles. If it's mathematics, it's 83,000 square miles.
If it's stupidity,
if it's calculus, it's 83,000 square miles. It continues to be 83,000 square miles.
But if it's stupidity, it could be anything. Dr. Gary Best, thank you for joining the program this evening, and we hope to have you back on this program. A wealth of knowledge, a distinguished Guyanese here on Voice of the Diaspora. Thank you very much to my viewers. Until next time, Dr. Gary Best, good night. Good night to my viewers, and do have a pleasant evening.
We are a peaceful people, struggling we struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belong to we. Not the one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. This land is our land now, we're gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow, but never break. Our fathers came here, and they lived and died here, and we are moving from here, make no mistake.
Probably on the maritime area, give Venezuela a channel out to the sea. So you make a slight concession in the maritime area.
We are a peaceful people, struggling we struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belong to we. Not the one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. This land is our land now, we're gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow, but never break. Our fathers came here, and they lived and died here, and we are moving from here, make no mistake. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belong to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupanuni and the Essequibo, daytime or night. Though we criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we mean to keep it. We have that right. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belong to we. not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade.